Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure that you like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff, or you can check us out anywhere you get your podcast from. The Four Nations Face-Off was the best hockey that we have seen, especially if you primarily watch the Pittsburgh Penguins. Four Nations was the best hockey you've probably seen in a handful of years. And the Penguins quickly reminded us this past weekend of what this season is about for this organization. It was a rough weekend for the Pens. Back-to-back games, getting back off of that long extended break. An 8-3 loss to the Washington Capitals, in which, I'm not going to lie to you, it looked pretty rough at the end of that game. They had a good first 20 minutes, 25 minutes. You could even kind of squint and say they played well through the first 30 minutes, but it fell apart quickly and they ended up falling 8-3 to their hated rivals. And then they followed it up on the second half of a back-to-back, a situation in which they have been better than you would expect this season, with a 5-3 loss to the New York Rangers. They outplayed those Rangers all game, including a 16-0 run and advantage in shots on goal through the first 15 minutes of the second period, but they fall short. And last night's game, I'll say, falls pretty firmly on the shoulders of goaltender Yoel Blomqvist. He had a rough night. Negative 1.96 goals saved above expected, according to MoneyPuck.com, which essentially means an average goaltender or a goaltender playing at league average levels would have saved at least 2 of the 4 goals that Blomqvist let up. And whenever you end up losing by 1 goal with, of course, the empty netter at the end, you can make the connection there saying that Yoel Blomqvist cost them that game yesterday against the New York Rangers. So at the end of the day, it's 2 back-to-back losses against division opponents, a matchup in which the Penguins have struggled all season long. It doesn't matter if it's the Caps. It doesn't matter if it's the Rangers, if it's the Islanders, if it's the Blue Jackets, even the Philadelphia Flyers. The Penguins have not performed well against their own division in the 2024-25 season. And like I mentioned at the top of the show, it's a reality check. It is a reminder of what the reality is for this year's Pittsburgh Penguins team. They are one of the worst defensive hockey teams in the National Hockey League. Their goaltending, whether it be Alex Nedeljkovic on Saturday, Yoel Blomqvist on Sunday, remains a concern. It can be good. We saw leading into the Four Nations face-off break that Alex Nedeljkovic was red hot. 930 plus save percentage, winning almost every single game that he plays. And if they lose, it typically takes until overtime or a shootout for Alex Nedeljkovic. Well, he looked poor in his first taste of action since the Four Nations break on Saturday. And Yoel Blomqvist, like I just mentioned, cost him the game on Sunday. So while the goaltending has potential to be good, more often than not, it hasn't been this season. And that was the case over the weekend. And the last little dose of reality here, and I know PK Subban might not want to hear this, the Penguins are, not might, not could, they are a rebuilding hockey team. Kyle Dubas has picked a lane, and anybody that has paid attention to every single move since he traded away Jake Gensel last March would know and would be able to come away with the assumption that they are a rebuilding hockey team. Just because they didn't plaster it on the wall and Kyle Dubas isn't using it as his mantra doesn't mean that they haven't picked a lane. They're a rebuilding team. Sidney Crosby knew this. So for everybody saying, it stinks for Sidney Crosby, he was on that great Team Canada team, winning gold, drinking champagne, to 48 hours later getting absolutely torched by his longtime rival, Alex Ovechkin. He knew this was going to happen. He is accepting that this is going to happen. He signed on for 2 more years with the knowledge that they were going to be a bad hockey team this year. Unless some crazy stuff happened on almost every single level, Sid knew that this was going to be a down year for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Heck, that's maybe why he signed a 2-year extension, because the conversations with Dubas might have circled around, we're not going to be good this year. We might not be good next year, but a year after that, that's the year that we think that we could really get going. Who knows what the internal timeline is, but Crosby knew that this was going to be a rebuilding team this year. So for everybody in the national media that's saying, oh, pity Crosby, he's probably pissed off. He's not. He knew this was coming. The Pens now sit after this weekend in line for the 6th overall pick, and they are teetering on the verge of that 5th overall pick alongside the Seattle Kraken, not to mention the fact that they might have another first-round pick this year. The New York Rangers, as of right now, are sitting on the 13th overall pick, and that pick that is coming to the Pittsburgh Penguins is top 13 protected. So a little bit of a waiver, and the Penguins could end up with a top 5 pick and the 14th overall selection. That is 100% unequivocally what you would say about a rebuilding team, especially whenever you're looking at 23 games remaining and the Penguins currently have a higher chance at 7.5% at getting the first overall selection than they do of making the Stanley Cup playoffs. According to MoneyPuck.com, the Penguins have a 0.8% chance to make the playoffs and a 7.5% chance as of this moment to get the first overall pick. If that doesn't tell you where they're at, if that doesn't smack you in the face with some reality, I don't know what will. Let's close off this episode with our weekly Penguins power ranking, something we do every single Monday. We haven't done it for a couple weeks, of course, due to the Four Nations break, but we're back. The Penguins are back, and there are a couple of decent performances over the weekend that we should acknowledge. First and foremost, at number 5 is somebody that didn't play over the weekend. Therefore, he moves back a couple spots, but I'm not knocking him out of the top 5 simply because he didn't play, and that is Bryan Rust. He missed both games this weekend due to an illness, but I think with his absence, you kind of noticed that the Penguins need him for that top 6 to be able to be competitive with anybody in this National Hockey League. Yeah, they outplayed the New York Rangers, but the New York Rangers are a bad hockey team this year, and they showed it yesterday and still beat the Penguins. The drop-off from winger after Bryan Rust, it is Rickard, Rakell, Bryan Rust, and then a severe drop-off. So for that, I keep Bryan Rust in the top 5, despite the fact that he has not played a hockey game in a very long time. At this point, almost 3 weeks. At number 4, somebody who fell out of this top 5 ranking before we went to the Four Nations break simply because he was dealing with an injury. And even when he was healthy, he had been struggling over the past calendar month. And that's Evgeni Malkin. What a wild weekend for Evgeni Malkin. He missed the last 6 games prior to the Four Nations break, comes back. Before they even play a game, he starts to say, you know what? I've seen a little bit of speculation about my career and my potential retirement and me going over to Russia. That's not happening. I haven't said anything about retirement. Then he goes out there over the weekend and shows that, hey, there's a lot of gas left in that tank. I'm not sure how much that's going to sustain over an extended period, but he certainly had a lot of burst on Saturday and Sunday. Finishes the weekend with 3 points in 2 games, including a goal in yesterday's performance. And I thought Evgeni Malkin looked as good as we've seen him look all season long. And for that reason, he jumps back into the top 5 and reasserts himself as the number 4 player on the Pittsburgh Penguins power rankings. At number 3, somebody who didn't put up a lot of numbers, didn't light the lamp over the weekend, and overall wasn't overly impressive at the Four Nations faceoff. And that's Rickard Rakell. Even though he didn't play exceedingly well for Team Sweden, even though he didn't finish on any of his chances over the weekend, his talent feels like it jumps out even more without Bryan Rust. I mentioned when I was talking about Rust that it is Rickard, Rust, and then a little bit of a gap, and then probably a Michael Bunting. You might be able to throw Danton Heinen in there in the bottom section of Section 2, but you notice that Rickard Rakell is just a step above everybody else playing wing over the weekend when he's the only guy playing wing over the weekend that is a bona fide, every single day, top 6 winger. He made a few ridiculous plays, including a sprawling play yesterday to set up a kind of shorthanded 2-on-1, or a quick 2-on-1, I should say, with Anthony Beauvillier. The talent level is up there. The trade stock is through the roof, and I'm not exactly sure what we're going to see the rest of this week into next week as the trade deadline looms. But I am sure of one thing. Rickard Rakell is undoubtedly one of the top 3 Pittsburgh Penguins, and I'm not taking him out of the top 3 anytime soon, even if he doesn't score goals, because if you watched the game yesterday, if you watched the game on Saturday, you know what I'm talking about. The kid has a lot of talent, and he's putting it all together this year and still on pace for nearly, not on pace to get a career high, but now he's on pace to nearly match his career high in points, and he's still on pace to pass his career high in goals. At number 2, and this is one that not a lot of people are going to be happy with because this is the punching bag outside of Kyle Dubas and Mike Sullivan. He is the on-ice version of the punching bag for the Penguins fan base, and that is Erik Karlsson. He looked exceedingly good at the Four Nations face-off, and I said it last week on Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live that I was not surprised that he was very good at the Four Nations face-off. I mean, that style, that short-form tournament style, perfectly fits what Erik Karlsson is. He is a sprint to the finish line, all gas, no brakes type of player. And typically, that is all on the offensive side of the ice. And that lends itself to an international tournament where you're just trying to get as many wins as you can in a 3-game stretch. You're not trying to stretch this out over 82 games. You just need short bursts from your players and your top players. And that's what Erik Karlsson brought to Team Sweden. He looked extremely good. And now, in the NHL, back with the Pittsburgh Penguins, he has extended his point streak to 7 games. We always say on the Tip of the Ice-Burgh, when is Erik Karlsson worth it? It's when he's scoring. If he's not scoring, it's not worth what he's given you in the defensive zone. But if he's giving you a point, 2 points per game, that's when you're saying, all right, you can kind of live with the defensive deficiencies. You can live with the egregious turnover here or there, as long as he's putting the puck in the back of the net, or as long as he's setting up other players to get tap-in goals or put the puck in the back of the net. He's on a 7-game point streak, one of the best on the Pittsburgh Penguins, and right now he is just finding offense for a team that desperately needs it. Like I mentioned, 7-game point streak, currently going 2 goals, 6 assists, and that notches him at number 2 in the power rankings. And to close things out, I mean, who else is going to be at number 1? He's been at number 1 now for several weeks, and that is Sidney Crosby. He has carried that momentum over from the Four Nations face-off and played 2 spectacular games. And I think you have to give more credit to Crosby, knowing that he just went through one of the fastest, most physical tournaments that we have seen, and fastest, most physical 10 days of hockey, not even in a tournament setting, of hockey that we have seen in years. He was the oldest player in that tournament at 37 years old. He was one of the best players in that tournament, and he was playing injured throughout that tournament and presumably is still injured as he returns to the Pittsburgh Penguins. And yet, still one of the best players out there on the ice. Better than Alex Evgeni on Saturday, better than Artemi Panarin on Sunday, better than Zibanejad on Sunday. He was the best player, maybe except for Evgeni Malkin on the ice this weekend. 1 goal, 1 assist in the 2 games, and now he sits there at 20 points shy of a point-per-game season for this year, and his 20th point-per-game season in a row to begin his career, taking the all-time marks away from Wayne Gretzky. So there you have it. The top 5 for this week. Bryan Rust drops down to number 5. Presumably, once he gets back in the lineup, he'll be able to get back higher into this top 5. Evgeni Malkin is back in the top 5 at number 4. Rickard Rakell drops to number 3. Erik Karlsson has impressed over the last couple of weeks. He's moved up to number 2 thanks to his point streak. And Sidney Crosby reigns as the number 1 player for the Pittsburgh Penguins. That's going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure that you like, share, subscribe if you liked this video, or you can check us out anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.